Good afternoon, or good noon, because we have some people that will be joining us Pacific time, given that our guest is coming from California. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 7 of season 3 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole M. Young Martin, and I serve as a producer and host for the series. I am back in my home office today in Northern Connecticut. Our last episode, I was in New York City. Today, it is raining and dreary out. It looks like a big sad face outside. And I think it rained the last time we were together as well. Today is perfect for sweaters, some hot chocolate or tea. I have some tea here. I have blueberry lavender, which is amazingly good to accompany for today's episode. I am very excited to get today's conversation started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind-the-scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during summer of 2020, we've hosted over 40 authors representing various genres, including children's books, young adult fiction, poetry, urban creative nonfiction, memoir, history, horror, essays, food, and culture from around the globe, including Western Massachusetts, Maryland, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., upstate New York, New York's Hudson Valley, Vermont, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Chicago, Virginia, Portugal, and Jacksonville, Florida. Today, we welcome Toni Ann Johnson, who is joining us from Los Angeles. I believe she's my second author from the LA area. We're going to be talking today about her award-winning short story collection, Light Skin Gone to Waste, which was published in October. It's received praise from Publishers Weekly, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the Washington Post. I'd like to share with you some insight on Light Skin Gone to Waste from its editor, Roxane Gay. Toni Ann Johnson's Light Skin Gone to Waste is one of the most engrossing short story collections I've read in recent memory. These interconnected stories about a Black family living in a predominantly white suburb of New York City are impeccably written, incisive, and often infuriating and unforgettable. At the center of many of these stories is Philip Arrington, a psychologist who tries to reshape the world to his liking as he moves through it, regardless of the ways his actions affect the people in his intimate orbit. With a deft eye for detail, crisp writing, and an uncanny understanding of human frailties, Toni Ann Johnson has created an endlessly interesting American family portrait. So a little bit about today's guest. Toni Ann Johnson won the Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction for her linked story collection, Light Skin Gone to Waste, which we'll be talking about today, selected for the prize and edited by Roxane Gay. A novella, Homegoing, was published in 2021 after winning Accents Publishing's inaugural novella contest. A novel, Remedy for a Broken Angel, was nominated for a 2015 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work by a Debut Author. Johnson won the Humanitas Prize for her teleplays Ruby Bridges, which was on a Disney and ABC production, and Crown Heights on Showtime, both of which are based on true stories that examine race relations. She's been a Callaloo Writers Workshop Fellow and a Sundance Screenwriters Lab Fellow, and she has received support for her writing from the One Story Summer Conference, the Prague Summer Program for Writers, the Center for Fiction, and the Hurston Wright Foundation. Johnson currently teaches fiction and screenwriting at Antioch University Los Angeles, where she earned her MFA in creative writing. To learn more about Toni and her work, please visit her website at www.toniannjohnson.com. That is ToniAnnJohnson.com. And throughout the episode, I will be putting on the screen her website and her social media handles. Special thanks to Amanda Chu Kwan for introducing me to Toni Ann. Toni Ann was one of my first scheduled interviews for season 3. We've been chatting now for, I think, almost a year, counting down the days to our Black Writers Read chat. Toni Ann has worked across multiple media, including stage, screen, and the written published word, including essays. Her work spans across a diverse range of genres, platforms, and audiences. I've been very much looking forward to speaking with Toni Ann today, as she herself is a literary canon. For those of you who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. First, Toni Ann will read an excerpt from Light Skin Gone to Waste. Then we'll chat about her work. Afterwards, we'll engage in a conversation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A to all of our viewers if questions come through. We have viewers joining us today from Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and pose them to Toni Ann following our conversation. I'd now like to bring Toni Ann onto the virtual stage. Hello.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you
Thanks
too.
for having me.
I'm so excited to get our conversation started today. How is weather where you are, by the way?
It's cold. It rained last night, but it's cold in LA. People think it doesn't get cold here, but it does.
I never thought I would ever hear that. Someone say it's cold in LA.
I have on a sweater. I'm freezing.
Yes. Which both of us are matching today. We're
Yes.
both in a very clear, distinct red. Cool. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Have fun reading.
Okay, thank you. I'm reading from a story called Got to Be Real. Monroe, New York, 1977. Susie. At first, Maddie thought I did it on purpose. She thought I was getting back at her because she asked me not to wear my rollers around her friends at her sleepover. She gets on my damn nerves. I am not embarrassed by my hair, my rollers, my ultra sheen, or my hairnet, thank you very much. Told her she could pucker up and kiss my big old butt. Still, I swear what happened was an accident. Now, I'm not going to lie. Her 14th birthday party was whack. Me and Maddie were the only Black girls out of like 15, and my cousin, being raised in the country, isn't exactly the blackest Black girl herself. Coming from a different world, I was more than a little bit out of place in her crowd. Maybe we have some stuff in common, but we don't listen to the same tunes, don't use the same kind of slang, don't eat the same kind of food, we don't use the same hair care or skincare products, and we don't even like the same kind of boys. They all thought I was from the city. That's code for Harlem or Bed-Stuy or someplace where they think they get shot. The way those girls looked at me, you would have thought I was some gangster bitch from the ghetto streets of one of those movies like Coffee or Superfly. I'm from South Floral Park, Long Island. Yeah, it's a mostly Black community, but we aren't pulling guns on anybody. Our houses are pretty with manicured lawns. Our parents have jobs and drive nice cars and send their kids to college. My brother goes to Howard. Those girls never even heard of Howard. They were all sitting around Aunt Velma's antique dining table eating a nasty ass Carvel ice cream cake because Aunt Velma couldn't be bothered to bake Maddie a real birthday cake. Couldn't be bothered to supervise either. Auntie made herself a cocktail and holed up in her room. I was bugging out when this pretty blonde girl in baby doll pajamas got up from the table, walked her giraffe-like legs across the room to the stereo, and without even asking Maddie, put on Barry Manilow. Are you for real? I asked her, and I wasn't just talking about the record. She sauntered back, swung her long hair to one side, and plopped down. We can play disco later, she said. Don't you think this is a pretty song? No, I said. And who said anything about disco? I like to dance, but that's not the only thing I'd want to hear. Maddie just sat there. She's grown up around these girls and their country manners, and she's in love with Barry frickin' Manilow, too. So his whack ass was blasting from the stereo while these snotty girls were sitting around the table thinking they were hot shit. I'd never seen so much stuck-upness in my life. A bunch of them were cheerleaders with Maddie last year in junior high, and there was more long hair flinging than this self-respecting nappy-headed girl in need of a press could take. So me and my little ponytail checked out for a few minutes and went downstairs. Didn't think anyone would miss us. Maddie's house has 3 levels. The dining room, living room, and kitchen are on the middle. Upstairs are the bedrooms, and down on the lower level is my crazy-ass uncle's office and waiting room. But the waiting room has 2 couches and lots of books, so it just looks like a den when no one's waiting in there. Uncle Phil was in Manhattan, staying at his other office overnight. My mom says he's a player, supposed to be some kind of shrink, but my mom says he's not a real doctor because he doesn't prescribe medicine. I don't know, and I don't really care, but what I do know is Uncle Phil is a trip. He talks and he's real light skinned, so people could mistake him for white. And he has a wannabe afro that can't be because, like Maddie, he's got that fine, almost white people hair that doesn't have enough kink to keep it standing up on top. So the shit flops in the middle and sags to the sides. He wears an earring too, a diamond stud. Maddie begs him to take it out when her friends are coming over, and the man is corny, but he thinks he's smooth. My mother says he's arrogant. I don't know about all that, but I do know he's a freak. Maddie showed me his sex books. Some of them he keeps hidden in his desk drawers, but some of them he leaves right out where anyone can see. And he has this art on the walls, these pictures that are totally nasty, like stuff you'd see in a dirty magazine. One picture near the bookcase is of this stick-drawn man and a stick-drawn woman, and the man has a big fat boner that looks like a giant pine cone, and the woman has huge fat titties that look like bowling balls. And there's a painting of this white woman with one of her pink nipples hanging all out. My mother would never allow my daddy to put some shit like that up in our house. But Mom says Aunt Velma can't control her man. Whenever I visit, me and Maddie look at the pictures in the book, The Joy of Sex, because it's fun and we learn stuff. So I was just sitting down there learning. When the blonde chick who put the Barry Manilow single on came through to use the bathroom, I was thinking, oh Lord, but she smiled at me, which surprised me since we hadn't gotten off to the best start upstairs. The other girls didn't smile at me. Some of them seemed scared, like I was going to steal their shit or beat their ass or something. When she came out of the bathroom, she looked down at the book and her green eyes bugged out. What are you doing? She asked, like she was half scolding me, but like she was into it too. The page was open to a drawing of this white couple boning. She leaned closer. Oh my God, she said, kind of squealing. Then she lowered her voice. Can I look at it with you? I almost cracked up because she reminded me of me the way she seemed to want to get into some shit. I guess, I said, why not? She plopped down next to me. Where the heck did you get this? She whispered. Does Madeline know you're down here? My uncle keeps it on the bookshelf, I said. Maddie doesn't care. As long as my aunt doesn't come down here, it's cool. She giggled. That's funny how you and Maddie say aunt. We say aunt. Aunt sounds so formal. Why do you say it like that? I don't know, I answered. That's just how we say it. She looked at me like she wanted something else, but she didn't. She stared back at The Joy of Sex. Her baby blue baby doll nightdress made her sunburned pink legs look even longer than they were. She hugged her thighs to her chest, grabbed her long toes, and cracked them, which made me cringe. Turn the page, she demanded. That rubbed me the wrong way. Because who the hell was she to be telling me what to do? But I wanted to see the next page anyway, so I kept my cool. Here's where it got funky. I turned the page, and there was a drawing of a hippie-ish-looking white dude with long, dark hair, and he had his bearded face deep in the cooch of a brunette white woman with hairy armpits. Her head was tilted back, and she looked like she was digging it. Me and Maddie looked at the same page a few days earlier, and she told me some dirt about some girl I didn't even know, but I figured this chick might be interested since she was from around there. So I told her, see that? Some hoe named Crystal Zelinsky did that with a guy named Dave Someoneski. The girl's whole attitude changed. Her feet hit the floor. Boom! She stood. Her cheeks turned red like apples, and she looked like she wanted to slap me. She breathed in, then out with a huff sound and stomped off. At first, I wasn't sure what the fuck her problem was. I heard her stomps go up the stairs toward the dining room, then past there to the top floor. A door slammed. Oh shit, I thought. My nails hit my teeth as my hands flew to my face. I had this sinking feeling that either she was friends with Crystal Zelinsky or worse, she was Crystal Zelinsky. Are you a fucking dimwit, Susie? Maddie screamed at me a couple of minutes later. Her eyes were popped open so you could see her entire eye like chocolate M&Ms floating in spoonfuls of milk. Her hair, which she'd straightened for the party, was getting frizzy because she was sweating. She looked up at me and shrieked, do you have any idea what you've done? Her retainer was in and spit shot out of her mouth and landed on my nose. Ugh. I wiped it and stood there while she tried to scold me. Please. Maddie's like a foot shorter than I am. And on top of that, she was wearing short-sleeved lavender pajamas with pink bunnies on them and green furry slippers. About as intimidating as a munchkin. We were in the hallway outside of Maddie's room where Chris had locked herself in and was now sobbing. I could see over the railing to the dining room below where most of Maddie's friends were still spooning up that melted cake. Barry was on repeat, whining like a little bitch, and it made me want to hurl myself off the balcony and end it all. Down through glasses that looked like something my 70-year-old Nana would wear. You idiot, Maddie snapped at me and punched her own leg like a crazy person. Why would you open your big mouth without knowing who you were talking to? Fuck! She stomped her green furry foot. Mad munchkin. Franny, with her roly-poly booty, turned to Maddie all on her high horse and peered over her old lady glasses. Excuse me, but where did your cousin hear that gossip in the first place? Maddie bit her lip and piped down because she was the one who told me, and Franny knew because she was standing there when I told Maddie what happened. Mm-hmm, Franny said. Why don't you worry about apologizing instead of berating your cousin who was only repeating the lies you told? Crystal is Catholic, by the way. She's not slutty like you people. Maddie turned to me and mouthed, I'm gonna kill you. Listen, I said to Franny, you didn't just insult me and my cousin, did you? Because if you did, I'm gonna have to cut you. I stepped closer and stuck my chest out like a dude. Franny backed up, sucked in her thick cheeks, and got paler than she already was. Maddie rolled her eyes and groaned. Don't listen to her, she said. Susie doesn't have a knife. Her father drives a Mercedes. She grit her teeth at me. Would you stop it, Suzanne? They can't tell that you're kidding. I stared Franny down. Wouldn't be so sure of that if I were you. I could tell Franny was about to pee on herself. She was scared as shit. I was a tall, lean, mean, brown machine, and I bet she could tell just by looking at me I could kick her fat ass to the moon. She pushed her glasses back up her oily nose and marched down the hall in her ratty red pajamas that looked like she stole them from her daddy. Franny! Maddie yelled, sounding like she was pleading. I'm calling my mother, Franny squealed without looking back. I'm going home. Great, Maddie snapped at me. What the hell is wrong with you? I've got to go to school with these people. What is wrong with you? I asked. That girl is not your friend. Let her take her ugly behind home. Why do you care? You don't know who my friends are, Susie. She sucked up retainer spit and wiped her tears. You don't understand how it is. You got that right, girlie, I said. I don't have a damn clue, because where I come from, I don't gossip about people I invite to my house, and I don't hang out with people who think they're better than me. I don't hang out with people I think are better than me either. She glared at me and sniffled. I don't think anyone's better than me, Susie. Maybe I want to be more like my friends, but so what? She smoothed her hair back with both hands like it bothered her that it was frizzing up. Be yourself, I said. I am myself. I'm from here. I'm not you. I don't have to be like you. Oh, I felt sorry for Maddie. She might want to pretend she's not different from those girls, but listening to Barry Manilow and blow drying your hair to look like theirs doesn't make you one of them. Thanks.
You are such an amazing actor. I was like,
Thank you.
Like while you were reading, I'm like, is she gonna turn this into like a one-woman show? Because I could easily see that. I could.
Did turn one of the stories into a one-woman show, but not this one. So the story, The Way We Fell Out of Touch, where Velma has a white maid, Gertie, I turned that into a one-woman show, and I play both parts.
Wow.
Yeah, I did it in Carmel, California at the Cherry Center for the Arts, and I'm hoping to do a full production. I've done it twice up there as presentations, like stage reading presentations. So we're trying to raise money to do at least like a couple of week run up there next year sometime.
Nice. Please keep me posted.
I will.
Yeah, so let's go ahead into our interview questions. I have a range of things, including not only on the book, but also on your career. So the first question I have for you, Toni Ann, is I would like to start off with the title of the book. Why Light Skin Gone to Waste, and what is the origin story?
Okay, so there's a story in the book called Light Skin Gone to Waste, and chronologically, it takes place right before this story, chronologically by year. So Maddie is 13 in that story, and she has gotten to the point where she's frustrated because she's very light. So some people don't realize that she's Black, and then when they find out, they have an issue with it. And so in that story, she decides to cut all her hair off. She's also been blow drying her hair and using a curling iron and burning herself with the curling. And she's just fed up. So she cuts all her hair off, and she has a short afro. And she goes to see relatives, and she is light among her relatives. And one of the relatives says that to her. She says something like, you have still just the tip of the tar brush, but now your light skin's gone to waste. And it's an insult. That means like, okay, like you have this light skin and you've ruined it now with your short hair. So it's a horrible insult. I don't recommend that anybody ever say that to anyone, but it's used in that context. And it's also used to just, in general, insult a light-skinned Black person who's just messing up, or if they're unattractive. There's just a lot of ways that the phrase is used. And the origin story was that story, but I decided to call the whole book Light Skin Gone to Waste, but because I thought it was a good way to kind of touch on the theme of all the characters. So Phil, Velma, and Maddie are all very light skinned, but they have things about their lives that are not that don't make them happy. And so in that way, their light skin does not necessarily bring them everything that some people think light skin affords you. So at that time, mid-century, it was thought to be easier to be light skinned than to be darker skinned. And in some ways, the family does capitalize on that. But ultimately, I think they have so many inner issues and problems that it doesn't really make their lives as much better as they might have hoped.
Yeah, because one of the things I was doing as I was reading the book, thinking about the brown paper bag test and and just the uniqueness of colorism, and it brought me to like Nella Larson's book Passing, and I'm just like, but I don't see these characters, as you mentioned, living such a privileged life where they are able to pass. Instead, what's interesting, and I'll go into my next question, what's interesting is that it's told from the vantage point of the Black experience, as opposed to it being from the we're going to pass and assimilate into whiteness experience.
Right.
And colorism is, especially like the light-skinnedness, like the light-skin privilege operates so differently in Black communities. It's like, no, you think you're better than us. It sometimes is a disadvantage.
Sometimes, I think sometimes it is an advantage, and sometimes it just isn't. It's not that much of an advantage for Maddie in this world, because once people realize that she is Black, she is rejected in some places, in some cases, not always. Like she definitely has friends, but even her friends don't see her really as their social equal. Yeah. Because of what was going on mid-century in the country, because there wasn't a prevailing sense of the Black middle class, and certainly the white people in this community didn't know anything about the Black middle class. They just weren't exposed to that. And so they saw Maddie as just, oh, like you're Black, like those people we see on TV, and you come from less than us. You are, I don't think they would consciously have said she was less human, but they knew they understood what the racial hierarchy of the country was, and still is, basically. They understood that. And so she felt that. And she knew kind of, how they saw her. Even if they loved her and enjoyed her company, they still understood that in the racial hierarchy, she was lower than they were.
Hmm. And talking about Maddie, this goes into my next question. Light Skin Gone to Waste is a collection of short stories revolving around specific central themes of racism, classism, familiar relationships, and somewhat of a coming of age story. Why short story for such prolific topics?
That's a good question. I was in graduate school when I started to put this book together, and short stories, was a form that I was learning. I was being given short story collections to read. So I read Sherman Alexie's The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven. And I read Junot Diaz's Drown. I read, this woman's name escapes me. There's another writer whose short story collection I read. I read a variety of short story collections by people of color and not by people of color, but
Mhm.
The Lone Ranger and Tonto, Fist Fight in Heaven, and Drown in particular seemed to me to be doing something that I hoped to do, which was, repeating characters, using a set of characters repeatedly throughout the book, and exploring, some of the different things that were going on in the community and in the families.
Mm.
And so I just followed that model. The original story that I wrote was the second story in the book, Claiming Tobias. And I had conceived that story like many, many years ago, but I didn't start writing it until I was in the program. And so I always thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this story collection. But that was 2006 was when I started that program, and I graduated in 2008. I didn't finish a draft of the book until 2021. So it was a very
Wow.
long time, but there's a whole lot that happened in between there. I published another book and then another book after that, and I was working on a different version of this book that was twice the length. So I've written quite a lot of stories about this family in this town, and out of the town. But yeah, I was asked to try to reconceive the book as a novel, and I did try to do that. It took a lot of time, and I was asked to add other perspectives. So I had in that version of the book, I had a story from a neighbor's point of view, multiple stories from Maddie's sister's point of view, the story from her grandmother's point of view. There were all these other stories, and the book swelled into this big, long tome. It was like 500 pages, and there were some things that were good about it, but it was just too much, I think, it didn't read like a novel because it wasn't conceived originally like a novel. It was conceived in stories, which is, it's episodic. So it didn't have like that, overarching arc, like where the character, comes to or one main character comes to an epiphany and then changes. And we know that going forward, they're going to be different. Like it just didn't accomplish that. And so it didn't work as a novel, and it didn't sell. And so after it didn't sell, I was very upset and disappointed, but I saw this opportunity to submit to the Flannery O'Connor Award, and that's what I did, and that's how I got the book published.
Nice. That's awesome. And I have a question about that later on associated with the press. In Light Skin Gone to Waste, the narrator, and this I think goes into like why it works so well as short story as opposed to an entire novel. The narrator shifts as the story progresses. Why this specific choice, and how did you go about selecting which narrator and perspective for each part of the larger collection?
That's an interesting question. So I don't think I consciously decided I'm going to have this person be that voice and this person be that voice. All of these stories are based on my family's experience in that town. And so they're all either memories or stories that were told to me, family lore. So the first story I wasn't born yet for, but I heard about that story from my father. I heard it from my mother's point of view, and she denies some of it. And I heard it from my sister's point of view. So that was I just kind of put together, I interviewed my dad. He was still living when I started working on that story. I interviewed my dad, and I had an opportunity to talk to my sister, and she told me a little bit about what she remembered. And my mother always would say, that didn't happen, that didn't happen. But my sister
Mhm.
corroborated what my father said. So I just chose Phil because his seemed to be he was the one, my father was the one who told me the story, and I based Phil on my father. So that story came from his point of view. And then originally, when I first started thinking about the book, all the stories were from Maddie's point of view, and Maddie is based on me. So, but that,
Oh,
wasn't really enough. Like, you kind of needed an adult perspective here and there. And so that's when Phil and Velma, started to come in. But every story, it's fiction, but every story is based on some real event in my family
wow.
history.
Wow. And then also, this is an aside question that I thought of as you were reading. Where did you grow up? Because when you started acting, I picked up on like you grew up in a very urban environment based on that
No, I grew up
character.
in Monroe, New York, which was not urban at all. In fact, it wasn't even
Oh,
a suburb, and people call it a suburb because they've never been there. But Monroe was not a suburb. Monroe was rural. There were cows like up the street when I was a little
what?
girl. It was a rural community. It's probably considered a commuting suburb now, but it wasn't really considered a suburb in the 60s. Maybe it started to become one in the 70s, but when my parents moved there, Monroe was just a small urban hick town. Susie, the character I was reading, she
Yeah.
grew up where she says in Long Island,
Right.
which is suburban and closer to the city than where Maddie grew up. But that's Susie, and I can play Susie because I wrote that, but I
Right.
don't really talk like that.
Yeah.
That's how I chose. That's the vernacular that I chose to give that character.
Nice. Because you snapped into it so smoothly. And I'm like, yes, Toni Ann is an amazing actor, but I'm curious, like, was there some, like Stanislavski that she was pulling there to make this
Well,
work?
I did study Stanislavski. I went to the
Yes.
Strasberg Theater Institute, and I started there when I was a child. I was 14 when I started there, and Lee taught a version of Stanislavski. So yeah, I did have that. But yeah, I'm
Nice.
not sure if I was pulling from that for that piece. That was more, from my fiction, and it's just a voice. It's just a particularly voice heavy story. But
Nice.
every story isn't like that. There are some others that are kind of voice heavy, like The Way We Fell Out of Touch, which
Yeah.
is Velma and Gertie. That's a really voice heavy story. But Susie in particular just has such a fun voice. Like, it's just fun
Right.
to read.
So I love it. So each story with Light Skin Gone to Waste seems like films in a film festival representing various genres. I like when I read the first story, which is Up That Hill, I was like, this is very film noir in terms of
I
like the
love that. You'd think that it never occurred to me, but I could see that. It just never, I never thought of it like that, but I love that.
yeah, and like I was reading and I was literally because film noir is it's a very tight specific genre, and that's what I pictured as I was
Wow.
reading it, and also the time period too. So for me, and I think this is where your screenwriting comes in. It's so easy to imagine each moment and interaction through the vivid descriptions.
Mhm.
So how does your work as a screenwriter inform your process, if at all, when you wrote this book?
That's a good question. So there's two things. When I started teaching screenwriting, I began teaching screenwriting in the mid 2000s. I was teaching in high schools, but then I started teaching at USC, undergraduate screenwriters, and I had to find a way to teach them how to write dramatically. And so part of that process was to explain to them, like, all you can rely on is what we see and what we hear. And so
Yeah.
I had to take them through, like, really imagining what was on screen. And I that did sort of bleed over into my fiction. Like, as I'm writing my fiction, I want the reader to be able to see what is happening as it goes along. So one of my mentors at Antioch was Alma Luz Villanueva, and she would talk to us about the fictive dream. So you want to lull your reader into that dream, and one way to do that is to help them always have something to visualize. And then another mentor, Leonard Chang, who's also my partner now, he told me that, he gave me that note when I wrote my first book, my novel, in which I was not doing that. So I was having like long passages of just like the character's thoughts, but I was omitting what we were seeing, what we should be picturing while we're reading. And so that stuck with me. And that was something that I tried to teach my screenwriting students to do in their screenplays, but it was simultaneous, like, because I was working on fiction while I was teaching them screenwriting. But the idea of sort of being very clear about what the reader should be seeing, and then for my students being very clear about what's the viewer seeing. So your script is a blueprint for what's going to be on screen. I want you to focus, I would tell my students, I want you to focus on what is on screen in that moment. Don't tell me what somebody's thinking, because we can't shoot that. We can only shoot the visual, and we can have the dialogue, so we can hear the dialogue, but you can only rely on what we see and what we hear. And so I bring some of that to my fiction. However, in fiction, you do have the advantage of being able to show the reader or tell the reader what the character is thinking. So you have that interiority in fiction that you don't necessarily have in screenwriting.
I like just the conversation here. I'm like, your students are so fortunate because you're just so versed and talented in so many different writing genres. Like, I bet your students benefit from a lot. So I'm curious, and a side question, when it comes to genres, what all do you teach? Because it sounds like you have the ability to teach multiple genres.
Yeah, I've taught both fiction and screenwriting, but I've taught screenwriting a lot more. But I like teaching fiction. So more recently at Antioch, I've had the opportunity to teach fiction, but I have some screenwriting students as well.
Nice.
But learning to teach something really helps you get better at it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to dig a little deeper into some of the characters. And you kind of mentioned a little briefly the origins of Velma and Maddie, which I love those two characters, but for some reason I always tend to like gravitate towards the female characters in text.
Women.
Yeah. So
they have a little bit less agency, I guess, because in this story, because Phil is kind of calling the shots. So I was drawing from myself, and I mean, I feel like Maddie tries to take agency in the ways that she can, and so does Velma, but there's only so much they can do because they're stuck there. And that's Phil's choice to live in that community. But yeah, the Velma is based on my mother. Some of the way she talks is based on my mother. Definitely the narcissism is based on my mother. And some of the toughness and a little bit of the harshness in her personality stems from my experience of my mother. But she's also a character. She's not my mother. She's my version, my interpretation of my mother. And Maddie is me, but she's got some differences from me. I had to make them characters. This wasn't a memoir. Right. So I did have to, in order to get them on the page and create them, I had to make them their own characters, somewhat separate from me and my mother.
Mm-hmm. The next question that I have for you is about Phil. So he represents so many things: internalized racism, sexism, colorism, social stratification. So why a male figure chosen to carry so much? What is Phil's mission in the text? Why does Phil exist in this particular world, which is situated at a time when society and the ways we view and construct humanity is changing. Because I think the first chapter is what, like 1960, the first story is like 1962.
Yes. So what the first question was what?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I
Questions.
combine a lot of questions into one.
Let me start with the first question. Why
Yeah.
a male character
Yes.
to embody that? So that was really just how it came out because, as I said, this is autobiographical fiction based on my family. So Phil is based on my father. He also is a character, but whatever he seems to project, I think he does have some internalized racism, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than just that. I think Phil's perspective is what the writer Touré calls post-blackness. Have you read
Yes.
that book, like Who's
Yes.
Afraid of Post-Blackness? So post-blackness is a perspective where a Black person recognizes that they're Black. They don't resist being Black, but they don't want to be defined by their Blackness. They don't want the dominant culture telling them, because you're Black, you must live here. Because you're Black, you must vacation here. Because you're Black, you must listen to this kind of music. Black people don't listen to that kind of music. Because you're Black, you must date within your race. Black, whatever. Phil pushes back against that, and Phil decides, I am going to be a man in this culture, and I'm going to avail myself of what all men avail themselves of, and I'm going to live to the best of my ability beyond the confines of Blackness. I don't think that Phil does not try to pass for white. Phil wears an afro, but he has tastes and propensities for things that the Black community, if there is, I don't think the Black community is a monolith, but I think that there has been a presumption that Black people are like this monolith, and he just doesn't agree. And he doesn't want to do or be or have only what the monolithic perspective of Blackness is supposed to be, or what white people think Blackness is supposed to be. He wants to do whatever the hell he wants to do.
Yep.
So I think that's what he represents. He's just going to live as he wants to live. And unfortunately, as he's pursuing all of those things, he is not sensitive to how some of his are affecting his family. It doesn't matter. Like they just have to get with that program. Yeah. And he's not very good at helping them through that, particularly with Maddie. Like he really doesn't care, and he's insensitive to his wife and doesn't seem to really care what is hurtful and upsetting to her either. So he's definitely a flawed character, but I feel like I don't want people to think like it's just that he hates being Black. I don't think that he hates being Black. I think that he hates the limitations that came with Blackness in mid-century, in the mid-century USA.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons, because this is definitely, your book is definitely an example of what I want Black writers read to do. It's this whole, we're legit looking across various experiences of those in the African diaspora. It's like I'm looking for guests whose like text pushes boundaries, who really examine the Black experience, which is not a monolith. And that's why when I started reading this, was of course we booked about a year out, and I was like, yep, this is exactly perfect for Black writers read, because it really questions what these genres should do, because there's this whole question of what is the Black author, what is the, and I'm like, no, there's no such thing, because our experiences are like so varied.
Yeah, I agree. They are so varied, and I guess that's something that that is definitely changing now. But I've been writing, since the early 80s. And so when I started writing, I was trying to say, like, hello, like, I exist, like, my experience exists. I'm here in the world. And I felt like I never saw myself in literature or on TV and movies. Like, I didn't see anybody who had my experience. And it's not that common, but I don't think that my family, as a middle class Black family, I don't think that's as uncommon as the dominant culture would have us believe.
Right.
There's a lot of Black middle class people, like, and that's one of the things that I think is frustrating for Maddie, is that she's not given the opportunity to meet other kids who also are growing up in white communities, or who
Right.
also are upper middle class and do things that most white people don't think Black people do.
Right.
You know, there was Jack and Jill. There were Black elite social organizations, none of which Phil wanted to be a part of.
Right.
So Maddie didn't have that opportunity to see other people like her, and I think that was kind of to her detriment. And the other thing is, I think that I would be remiss not to acknowledge that Maddie and you know, the Arrington family's proximity to whiteness does have some advantages. Like, Maddie is in a position to get along better with white people than somebody who didn't grow up around white people. She's in a position to, like, going forward in her life, like, have an easier time in white spaces because she's been exposed to it. So it's not like it was all bad, but the lack of seeing herself reflected, the lack of seeing other Black families like hers, that I think was not the greatest way to grow up.
Mm-hmm. So that takes me into my next question. Given that the book takes place over a span of multiple decades and focuses on specific central characters, given that it is short story, what is the experience that you've curated for readers, and what would you like the readers to take away from each of the stories, both alone and as a collection?
I guess I don't think I really had an agenda for that. I think, like, originally I was just trying to tell an authentic story and give an authentic experience, and something that really reflected my experience. But if there is something to be taken away, I guess it's just, you know, what we were talking about, just the existence of different types of Black experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody isn't from the South. Everybody isn't from, you know, an impoverished urban background.
Mm-hmm.
Black people have existed, not just in this book, but for years there has been a Black middle class.
Yep.
You know, so I guess I just want people to see something that they haven't seen, and to open their minds to, oh, like, that's different. I hadn't thought about that. Just so I don't want to write just because I can. I want to write to share something new, to share something that that I haven't seen, that doesn't exist. So I hadn't seen me, so I wrote me. You know?
Nice.
And yeah, I guess I'm sure there is more. Like, if I were to really, really think about it, there probably is more that I want people to take away. Like, one of the things I was exploring in the book is narcissism. And so that's a completely separate thing from racism. That's a completely separate thing from proximity to white people. Narcissism, but narcissism can exist in a Black family just as easily as it can exist in a white family, or in a family of another race. You know, so I think that sometimes, like, when we read Black writers, sometimes the focus is so much on the political experience or the experience of race that we ignore some of the other things that go on throughout human behavior and throughout the strata of race and class. So you can have a narcissist, you know, in a Black family, but I guess I haven't read a whole lot of examples of that, though I'm sure they exist. but I was trying to do multiple things in these stories. So I was trying to show a different example of race and class, but I was also trying to show something about the psychological nature of different people and how one's upbringing can affect the adult that emerges out of that childhood. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is why, like, my favorite story was the last one in the book. And I read that one several times. It's Maddie, and I don't want to give it away, but it's like, it really, it surmises everything of what you just said in terms of experiencing the true humanity of a family and what that does to someone's, like, existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you touched upon, like, the narcissism and all of these, like, personalities that happen, because I do think within the Black story, or stories about marginalized communities, that is missing, because we're just so focused on identity politics and the things that make us unique within that, like, sphere,
Mm-hmm.
that whole politicalness of it. We lose the fact that we are people that come with our own issues that are, you know, unique. Again, like the narcissism and that, like, just to throw mine out here, like, I really, and I haven't had a chance to really sit down to do this, I really want to explore, like, women in mental health, which is something that is across race, class,
Yeah.
sexuality, and gender. And I'm glad that you took the space to really do that here, because it's a conversation I feel like we have yet to have within the Black community that is separate from the racial identity, because it is something that's very prevalent as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question I have is, and I'm glad that you gave me the heads up about this, because I was like, oh, so this is a very unique relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Light Skin Gone to Waste was published by University of Georgia Press. Can you talk about how this relationship developed and why UGA Press for this particular project? And I do believe people who watch and listen to Black Writers Read would not know this background.
Okay. So the book was submitted by me to the Flannery O'Connor Award. I just saw the call in Poets and Writers. Somebody told me about it, and this was after it hadn't sold as a novel and had gone to, like, all these large presses, and they all passed.
Oh, wow.
So when that happened, I pulled out a lot of stuff from the book, and I just made it more. I prioritized the Arrington, the nuclear family that was living in Monroe. I prioritized them, and the book was much more contained. And the word count limit for submitting to the Flannery O'Connor Award was 75,000 words. So I had to cut a lot. Wow. And that's what I submitted, and it won. And UGA Press publishes all the Flannery O'Connor Award winning books. So I think it goes back to the 70s, maybe, when the award began. So they've been doing this for quite some time. So UGA Press publishes all those books. They're a series. So my book is actually, I think, 120 in the series. So that's how that came about. To be honest, I would have liked to have been published by a larger press because they pay better. But this was where, this was what the opportunity that presented itself, and I took it. So that's why this relationship, and it's been a good relationship. It's a reputable press, and certainly it was amazing to be able to work with Roxane Gay. I mean, I'm a fan of hers, and she was a great editor. She asked really good questions. She's not the in-house editor for UGA Press. They rotate their editor. So now Laurie Ostend, who's a previous winner of the Flannery O'Connor Award, she's the editor now. They do it in 3-year chunks. So Roxane Gay edited 3 of the Flannery O'Connor Award series books, and Laurie will now edit 3 of those as well. She chose her first one, and I think she has 2 more.
Nice. And I'm so glad. Thank you for mentioning about publishing, because that's something else we explore on Black Writers Read, given that we do talk about authors not only across the experiences that they write about, but across the experiences in which they get their work out there. Because we
Mhm.
have some people, so we've had some guests who have chosen to self-publish.
Mhm.
Um, ironically, the ones who have gone with big publishing houses have all been children's books that I just thought
Really?
of. Yep, that I've had on. I haven't
Oh,
had Yeah, I haven't had anyone on that's been published by a major publisher that was not a children's book.
why? Why do you think that is?
That's a really good question. I think, well, I'm lucky that I've had people like Amanda and Lisa Pegram come to me with people. I
Mhm.
think I'm new in the game in terms of, because I think, and I talked about this a couple of episodes ago, and I think I'm one of maybe five podcasts that do this, that talks about Black authors,
Okay, I think
including,
I've those.
yeah, including, you were on Black and Published last week, which Nikisha was
Yeah,
on a couple of episodes ago for her book.
yeah.
But what I
I love her.
want, yeah, oh my God, her interview was awesome and I loved her book. What I want to do differently is I want to be able to have, like, for example, I'm not a published author yet,
Mhm.
which I'm still working on that. But also, I want large, like, people who have been published by large publishers. Oh, Black Writers Read. But I think it's like I'm new to the game. Like, I've been doing the
Mhm.
live stream now for 3 seasons, but the actual audio podcast just started this season. And on top of it, I'm trying to increase my viewership, people. Like, I think, like, I'm still trying to find my unique footing and all of these things, but I'm like I would like there's a list. I have a list of desired authors who have been published, like, with big publishers to be on. It's just,
Mhm.
I'm like, I feel like I'm so new to the game. People are like, we don't know who you are.
Okay.
But yeah,
Well,
when
you'll
it
get
comes,
there.
I
You'll
think
get there.
I'm very confident I'll get there. Because to toot my own horn, I believe I'm a strong interviewer. And the mission of Black Writers Read, I think, is so unique. It's not just a certain type of Black writer, and it's also too across the globe. Like, I have a Nigerian writer who's now based in the U.S. booked for the spring. So, like, I'm trying, and I had someone from Costa Rica on recently. Like, I hope to be that. Not only do I hope to compliment, because what I love, a lot of my guests have been on the Keisha's
Mhm.
podcast. I like to compliment because, of course, we want to make sure that we get books in people's hands and people are reading Black authors. But, and my dog is, sorry, previewing. This is one of the joys of recording from home. I
What
would
kind of dog is it?
Oh, we have a lot of animals. This is our beagle, Naomi. She had to make an appearance. So, like,
Oh.
hi, Naomi, as my brother was leaving to go out. But I do hope that, and also too, the other thing that I don't want to do, I don't want to compete with the other, like, there's the Hurston Wright Foundation
Mhm.
podcast that I highly admire, Black Writer Studio. There's Nikisha's podcast. Like, there's so many podcasts that feature Black authors that I admire. And I'm like, I want to be able for us to be like, yes, there's a lot of us, but there's a reason why there needs to be a lot of us, because Black authors, there's still this whole question. And this is one of the reasons why I started the series, because originally this was only like a one-time event.
Mhm.
It's this
Oh, really?
whole, yeah, I originally did this for Juneteenth in 2020. It's supposed to be one day where it was like 16 authors reading for 3 hours. And people,
Wow.
yeah, and people were like, you need to do this more. So I ended up doing it monthly, and now I'm doing it like every couple of weeks. But it's this whole, like, and it's also the question that I posed to myself, like, when I start, actually, I originally started off in music and then went to theater and then into writing. And I keep getting this question, like, whenever I've submitted my own writing, people are like, you're not a writer because it doesn't fall into this type of thing. And I'm like, who says that writing has to fit into this box? And
Yeah.
so that's the reason why I wanted to expand upon Black Writers Read. Like, I had a cookbook author on, like, Margot was one of my first guests. And it's like, again, it's like this whole, who is a Black author and what does a Black author do? And I'm really trying to push that a little bit. And so that's why, yeah, so that's what I
That's
hope my
good.
podcast,
You
yeah.
should try to get Percival Everett on, because he actually writes about that, like he's writing other things now, but in the book Erasure, it talks about the limitations of being a Black writer and how the publishing industry, if the book isn't about the Black experience, but
Yeah.
it's a Black author, the publishing industry doesn't want to publish it because they don't know how to market it. So he has this thread in the book, like the guy wrote an adaptation of Greek myths, but he's Black. And so they say, well, what does this have to do with the Black experience? And he's like, well,
Oh,
what difference does it
wow.
make? I'm a writer and I wrote about this. Like, why does it have
Right.
to be about the Black experience? And he then creates this persona of this Sagar Lee, who then writes a parody of Native Son, and he publishes it, and it becomes this huge hit. And it's totally not his experience, but everybody says, "Oh, this is the authentic Black experience."
I love you said the authentic. Yeah, I will definitely, because I'm definitely familiar with his work. There are just so many authors that I want to have on. And actually I've had a couple of children's book authors who were on it, and they were, especially one that is written about the queer child experience. And they were like, typically when they've shopped their books around, it's like, oh, we already have this one author in our quaffer. And I'm like, agents, publishers, why do you operate like that? Because the Black experience cannot be surmised by one person in one genre. It just can't.
Yeah.
It can't. And then also too, because of how I identify as queer. I've had a lot of queer authors on as well, because I'm trying to, give the space to people who may not have had the space otherwise, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That's great.
Yeah. So now
You
on
want to
to,
name some of those authors? Let's give them a shout out.
yes, let's see. The children's book author that I just mentioned, I have to oh my god, I have to go back and actually look, because I've had such a great like roster of artists and like not playwrights, writers on, which I still want to get. So you are a screenwriter and playwright, but I haven't yet to have someone on to talk about like a screenplay or a stage play yet. But the author that I'm referencing regards to like the queer children's book and that narrative is Kaija Langley. She was on season 1. She was our very first guest. Other authors, Shannon Luders Manuel. She recently got acquired by a publisher, and she's working on a memoir on the biracial experience and her father, and alcoholism and all of these things from her dad's experience. We've had on an author who identifies as Native American and Black, April May. She does urban creative nonfiction. We've had on Kari Arande Polk, who's an academic and a historian. Like that conversation, that actually is one of my favorite conversations. One, because he's an academic. He teaches at Amherst College, not too far from me, but I've followed his work for some time. And I
What's his
love,
book?
so we talked about, let me see, we talked about an essay that he wrote around that time, but the book that he is known for is called Contagions of Empire: Scientific Racism, Sexuality, and Black Military Workers Abroad, 1898 to 1948. He is a
Wow, that
professor.
sounds like a dissertation.
It is.
Okay.
He's a professor of Black Studies and Sexuality, Women and Gender Studies
Okay.
at Amherst College.
Is that available like to download or read?
Yes, I think you have to purchase a hard copy of
Okay.
it, but it's really good. And then Tracy Cross, she writes horror. So
I've heard of Tracy.
so she was on last season. And then Saida Augustini, who is a poet, she was on last season. Natasha Marin, who is like, she calls herself a documentary writer and editor. She did the Black Imagination and forgot the name of the other book she was on last season. St. Clair Dietrich Jules, who wrote a book called My Beautiful Black Hair, was on this season. Trisha Elam Walker, children's book author, was on. Dr. Tara Betts, who is
I love Tara Betts.
Yep, amazing slam poet, was on. So I've had a really good breadth of authors on.
Has Tara Betts not published with a major publisher?
I think she has, but recently refused to disappear. And I have the book somewhere. Where do I have the book? I have it somewhere on my desk, but Refused to Disappear was published by, let me see. Yep, I have it right here. It was published by, and my desk is a mess, The Word Works, which is out of DC.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I feel like everybody knows Tara.
Yes, she is amazing.
She is. I saw her on Rian Amilcar Scott's panel, The Literary Genius of Kendrick Lamar, at AWP in 2017. And the whole panel, everybody was just great. And it was so interesting. And then I saw her on Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman's podcast, the Hurston Wright Black Studio.
Yeah,
I've forgotten the name of it, but I saw Tara interviewed on that, and I'm such a fan.
Yes, and thank you for allowing me to give a shout out to the authors who have been on previously. Like I
don't even know who they are. Curious.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. Like I have had like nothing but amazing guests who do a lot with like really, especially pushing the question about what is the literary canon and what belongs within the literary canon.
Mm.
Yeah. So I have a couple of questions about your career before we wrap up this afternoon.
Okay.
So you have a prolific career as a screenwriter, playwright, and essayist. How has your voice shifted exploring fiction, novel writing, and the short story? And why short story now in your career? Like you've kind of talked about, like the happenstance of the publishing world, but do you see yourself exploring short story more now, given...
I do, because it's easier to get that work out there. Like I can write a short story and submit it to a literary journal and they publish it. I don't need anybody's approval except for that press, that literary journal. Whereas if I publish a novel, I've got to try to find an agent. It's got to go out. Like it's got to go through work with an in-house editor. It's such a long process. So I felt for me, like I was publishing the short stories as I was writing them. So a lot of the short stories in the collection were already published elsewhere. And as a screenwriter, I was never fortunate enough to be able to just write what I did the way that I wanted, or tell stories that I wanted to tell and get them out into the world. I was a writer for hire. So I was writing, what I got hired to write, which meant because I was hired and being paid, I had to do pretty much what I was told. And I got tired of that because that was kind of crushing and squelching my own voice. And I had started out as a playwright. Nobody paid me to write my plays. I just wrote them. And sometimes they got produced and then I did get paid. But the impulse to write them wasn't to make money. It was to communicate something. And after my screenwriting career, where I did very well and made a lot of money, but I just was kind of bereft creatively at that point after a decade of not really writing my own stuff. So that's when I started to write fiction. And the first attempt was a novel, and it was okay, but not that good. And I ended up going back to school. That's when I got an MFA in creative writing. And that's where I started writing short stories. So I'm still writing novels and short stories. Novels are just a much longer process. And short stories, I just have more control and I can if a journal doesn't want to publish it, it's not that big a deal. But it's a bigger deal, like if you work on a novel and you can't get anybody to publish it, like that's kind of demoralizing. But short stories, it's very accessible for people to write and publish short stories.
And that's inspiring for me because I wrote a short story about a little over a year ago that I hope to get published. It's like, what, 750 words? So I'm hoping
to
get it out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of literary journals you can submit it to. It's like, do you want to be in print or do you want it to be online? Like, do you want it to be a top tier journal, or are you okay with like some of the lower tier? There's a lot of options.
Yeah, I just want to get it out there.
Well, then, like, if you want to get it out there to the largest, amount of people, then it's probably going to be easier to do that if you publish something that is going to be available online, because you can share the link like all the time. Print, if it's a big literary journal, it'll be seen by a lot of people and it's maybe more prestigious, but it's harder to get people to buy the print journal. Whereas if you just have a link, like it's easy to get people to see it.
No, that's really good to know. And also too, and this is another reason why I love doing Black Writers Read, selfishly for myself, because this is my MFA in writing, where I'm learning I'm learning so much about industry. And speaking of industry, what specific contributions do you want your work to make to the literary canon? And what does it mean to be a Black writer, creator, and cultural commentator at this time?
I think we've already touched on that. My contribution, at this point, seems to be just creating work that I didn't see. So I didn't see myself or my family, and I wrote about my experience that just was different than other experiences that I had read about. So I'm a big believer in connecting with one's own authenticity. So I think a lot about, my own upbringing, why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, and writing about my own experience helps me sharpen my own ideas and my perspective, and, creates a narrative for my life in some ways, especially when I'm, writing about myself, like literally, like true stories, like, autobiographical fiction. Everything I write is not autobiographical, but it all seems to stem from a similar place. So one of the first things I wrote was about an upper middle class biracial woman struggling with identity who falls in love with a working class white cop. So what that has, the relationship between that and my upbringing is I'm not biracial. Both my parents identify as Black, but people tell me I look biracial, and I grew up in a white working class environment. So I was very familiar with white working class people. I grew up around them. I went to school with them. They were my friends. And so I write from that place. I write out of what I experienced in life, even if I'm not writing about me. So that character was not me. The piece was called Gramercy Park is Closed to the Public. I didn't grow up in Gramercy Park. My family was not that rich. She's rich. My family was middle class, not mega rich like that. But I kind of understood what rich was. Like I met rich people, and I understood, and I lived, when I wrote that piece, I was living near Gramercy Park, so I was able to observe it and get a feel for it. But so, yeah, I think I write about race and class from a slightly different perspective than most people. So, or I shouldn't say most people, but most of what I've read. So there is this presumption that most Black people are of a lower socioeconomic class. And I write a little bit about that, but I don't stay there. Like, I don't ever only write about the lower socioeconomic class, because that is not my experience. I know plenty of college educated, middle class people, and I'm interested in that. And I've also met plenty of white people who weren't, as upper middle class as my family. And that's interesting because usually you don't see people writing about an upper middle class person with a person who's a little bit lower on the socioeconomic ladder than the Black person. But that's my experience. And so that's what I write about. And I feel like there's a place for that. It might be a small place, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that I fit into this small place. It's still authentic to me. And I try to do work that is good so that it's fun to read, or in some way you get something out of it when you read it. But it is a different experience than most people write about.
Yeah, and one thing too that people also need to remember is that like Black people didn't just start going to college because of the GI Bill or affirmative action and all these things. It's like even when you look at like Black Greek organizations and like the legacies where there's like generations of people in one family.
Since before the Civil War, there's been a Black middle class.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that. I think the dominant culture certainly doesn't talk about that much, but we're seeing it in that new show, The Gilded Age. So there's a great example of the Black middle class then, and I think that is post the Civil War, but even so, like we have not seen that community before. I've never seen that community on TV. Right. This upper middle class Black community. That is great. So things are changing, but yeah, I'm very interested in class and how the dominant culture has sort of marginalized a look at the Black middle class to the point where most people don't know that it existed or that it even exists now.
Right.
So that is of interest to me.
Yeah, and your work speaks to, and this is like probably like the 20th time I'm mentioning this author on Black Writers Read. Hopefully I'll get a chance to meet and interview her one day. Jasmine Guillory. Like I don't like romance novels, but I love hers. It definitely speaks to the Black professional experience, which is me. And I'm like, thank you for writing this, in the milieu of the romance novel, because it's an experience that exists, but we didn't have until then.
Yeah. And I should mention that in The Gilded Age, Sally Richardson is one of the executive producers and directors, and she's Black, or she's biracial, but she's Black. And then Sonia Warfield is a co-creator, and she's Black, and she was teaching at USC when I started teaching at USC, and now she's doing that show. But having more Black people come into the industry with their knowledge and experience that is different from, a typical white person's experience. Julian Fellows is English, so his is different from from white Americans. But I think Sally and Sonia's contribution to that show is amazing. And, I know the show isn't for everybody. Everybody doesn't like it. It's very soapy and campy, but I can't tell you how much I love seeing that period of time and seeing upper middle class Black people living thriving lives. That one of the main characters comes from that world. Her father's well-to-do. I think Audra McDonald plays the mother, and the costumes are amazing, and they live in a wonderful community in a beautiful house. And who knew?
Right.
Who knew? Now we know that it's based on, it's real. So that was exciting to me. And I think, my family has roots in New York, like going back that far.
Nice.
So my father's father's father, my great grandfather, became a middle class person. He had been enslaved in Virginia, and he bought property in the Bronx. And I have a picture of him, and he is impeccably dressed. And he looks, I don't know that he's educated, but he looks educated. He looks like a distinguished upper middle class man with style. And I never see those people except for in pictures. Like I haven't seen them until The Gilded Age. So I'm just loving that. the opportunity to see that world.
Which I need to start watching the series because actually, besides the 60s, one period of history that I love is the Gilded Age. Like, I eventually want to get to all of the mansions that are now museums and public,
Oh yeah, I've
I
been to some of them in New York.
wow, yeah, because I've been to the ones in Newport. We're trying to get to
That's in the show. Newport is in the show. Newport, Rhode
yeah,
Island, you're talking about?
yes.
Yeah, I think that's in the. I think I might be confusing it with something else, but I think so.
Nope, they do film at the Breakers. I've heard about
Okay.
that. Yeah, because we've wanted to go to the Breakers because we've been to the other houses. Go
Yeah.
and they're like, Breakers, we're live on set. No one can come because we're closed. And I'm like, okay. And then I want to go to the one that's in the Vanderbilt House in Hyde Park, Asheville, North Carolina. Like, what I love about that period is like the love of leisure. And I think that's something that, even though, yes, it's complicated because it was on the backs of like capitalism and all these things, but it's like we forgot what it was like to enjoy time and to like really take a break. And that was something, yes, again, on the backs of other people, but that's something that I've really appreciated about the Gilded Age, that whole like taking the time to really socialize, taking
Yeah.
the time to take a break. And I'm like, culturally, why have we stopped doing that? Or why do we look down upon people who
Yeah.
do that? I'm
There's
like,
a scene where the black family, or at least the mother and daughter, are dining in a restaurant, and there's all these other well-dressed black people like surrounding them, and I was just like eating it up, like, where is that? Who are those people? Like, it was just so exciting to see because
right.
I've never seen that before on TV.
I need to start. And it's on my lit. Like, it's literally saved. Watch this, but I haven't
Yeah.
sat down to watch it yet.
One of
But I
my
need to
friends
do
was an
that.
extra in one of those scenes, Mark Vaughn. So
Oh,
he's like sitting
wow.
behind, I think, Audra McDonald in one scene. I just love it. So I can't wait till it comes back. I think they got another season.
Yes, I hope so. And then lastly, my last question for you. How can the Black Writers Read community support you on your journey?
Well, I would love if they would buy my books.
Yes,
My Life
books,
Can Gone to
plural.
Waste, by Homegoing, and Remedy for a Broken Angel. And all three of my books are available on audiobook, and I do the narration for all three of them. So
Nice.
I would love for people to buy the audiobook or the book.
Nice. Yeah, because now that I know that you did the audiobook for Light Skin Go on the Waist, I'm definitely because I have a ton of Audible credits because I shop too much on Amazon. But I shop a lot on Amazon. But I will definitely check out the audiobook given
Please
now,
do. Thank you.
yeah, knowing that you're the voice behind it, which is awesome.
Thanks.
So Toni Ann, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is
Thank
now,
you, Nicole.
yeah, it's like you still have a little bit of time in your day here. Like, I cannot believe it's 4:26 Eastern time and it's already dark. I'm like,
Wow.
why is this happening?
Sorry. It'll get better in a few months.
Yeah, and then I can be out later in the day, which I don't get me wrong, I love this time of year because I love the holidays, but I'm like, it gets so dark so early. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh
Well,
my
thank
God.
you so much. I really
Yeah,
appreciate this.
yeah, thank you. And I have a couple of things to wrap up. So thank you so much, Toni Ann.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Black Writers Read. I am in the process of um, season 3 in the spring. All of it's finalized. I'm going to be announcing forthcoming episodes within the coming weeks on social media. So please be sure to find us on social media, which is Black Writers Read on Instagram. And if you just Google me, Nicole Young Martin, I'm all over the place. My website is NicoleMYoung.com to find me and everything that is going on within the coming weeks. Also, be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast because what we do is we do the live stream episode first, and the next I extract the audio from that and turn it into an audio podcast for accessibility for others to watch and listen to it. Well, actually listen to it on their own time. It is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And more importantly, thank you so much to all of you for spending the afternoon with us and ensuring Black authors continue to matter. Thank you so, so much. And I will see you in the next couple of weeks.